All right. Looks like we are live. Hello, fellow fly fishers. My name is Lance Egan. I'm happy to be with you this evening and showing you a couple of new patterns that I have coming out and also hopefully answering some of your questions. Uh, for those of you who don't know me, I am a Utah native, grown up here and learned to fish mostly Western waters. However, I'm a member of Fly Fishing Team USA and have traveled a lot of places across the country and across a few places across the globe and have tried to hone my skills as best as I can, as we're all doing, as we learn this lifelong pursuit. And I'd like to try and share with you anything that I can to help you understand these flies and also maybe catch a few more fish. Uh, if you need to get in touch with me after this is over, I work for a shop in Orem, Utah called Fly Fish Food. So we have an online presence, and you can get us on store.flyfishfood.com, or you can visit our retail store here in Orem. Otherwise, I want to start by thanking Umpqua for allowing me to kick off these tying sessions. We did some of these earlier this year, and they were very popular, and we had a lot of fun doing them. So we look forward to more. This is the first of them this season, I should say. Next up is the awesome Tyer Greg Garcia from Colorado. He's going to be up November 17th. That's a Tuesday at 6 p.m. So if you like this one and you want to see more of them, keep tuned in. Greg's going to be up next, and then I think they go just about every Tuesday or at least every week from then on for quite a while. So lots of good stuff in store. Uh, Otherwise, we're going to go through three flies today of my design. Two of them are darts. So if you're familiar with my red dart, we're going to go through a couple of other dart variations, and then we'll finish with a baitis nymph. During this process, we've pre-recorded the tying videos, where before in the tying sessions we were just using our phones, and when we have our phone here, you couldn't see the flies very well. So that was kind of our most common complaint was it was fun to interact with the Tyers, but you couldn't see the fly well enough to really see what's going on. So in this case, we ended up pre-recording the videos with a macro lens so you can see the fly up close and personal. And then I'm here live to help answer questions with you after each fly. So we're going to go through three flies. And then once we've gone through those and answered questions on the tying of them or how to fish them or any questions you might have, if there's time at the end, then we will open it up to any questions at all. So with that in mind, there's a chat box. So if you want to leave some questions, uh, please send your questions through, and I'll get to as many as I can. I probably won't be able to answer every single question, but I will get through as many as possible. So send those questions through, and then we'll get to tying here and start working through these flies. All right, let's get tying the blue dart. So many of you are probably familiar with the red dart. What you probably didn't know is that at the same time that the red dart came out, there was also a blue dart. Insert 12 to 15-year-old adolescent male jokes anywhere you like. It is a funny name. But the blue dart has its days, its glory days in the hot sun. It is a fun fly to tie, and it's a great fly to fish. Sometimes the fish go absolutely nuts for blue colors. So I've got once again, a jig hook in the vise. This is a size 14 hook with a 3.5 millimeter bead. You could vary the bead size based on, again, how much weight you want. So if you want a really heavy fly on this size hook, you can put a 4 mil bead. If you wanted a light fly, you could put a 2.5 or a 2.8 or a 3. This is a 3.5. So a 3.5 or a 3.3 would be somewhere in the middle of the weights for a 14, in my opinion. So anyway, gold bead, slotted, tungsten. I'm going to use some UTC Ultra Thread 70 in red. Seems a little crazy on a blue fly, I know, but we're just going to cover the body anyway, and we're going to have a little red hot spot right behind the bead. So I'm going to start the thread, work it towards the bend of the hook. I'm going to take some blue hackle fibers, which you can almost see against my blue shirt, and pull a few of these off. I don't know how many are here. I'm probably pinching maybe close to a 1/2 inch worth to make tail like that. If you're tying it bigger, you might need more. If you're tying it smaller, you might need less. I've tried to keep the tips relatively even, though I can see that I've failed. Let's see if I can save them. I want to try and keep those tips as even as possible to make a nice clean fly. That's a little better. Still not perfect, but good enough. Then I'm going to capture them with a thread right on top of the hook and rotate all the way to the bead. Now, one note on this fly, if you want to make it even heavier, you could add lead wire underneath the body. That would be just fine. It makes a little thicker body. It does add a little weight. I've kind of gotten more and more to where I don't add much weight to my flies other than the tungsten bead, but you sure can. If you want to make it just a little heavier, you could add a little bit of lead wire under there. Next up, I'm going to add some sulky tinsel in the bright sulky tinsel in the opal color, 8040, I believe this one is. And then I'm going to add some 7X tippet, and I'm going to tie both of these in at the same time. So I've got both those on my fingers. I'm going to capture them with the thread and then draw them down to where they're kind of tucked right behind that bead. Tie them both in full length, that way I don't get a tie-in bump at the back of the fly. Next up, we're going to add dubbing. This is the blue dubbing for Blue Dart, Ice Dub Kingfisher Blue. Nice bright blue flashy dubbing. So I'm going to add a little bit of that to the thread for the body. And as always, we get a lot of comments on ice dubbing. People have a hard time with dubbing in general. Ice dubbing is a little bit coarse, so I'm pulling up very, very small amounts, as you can see there, and adding them to the thread. It's kind of out of the frame, I realize, but you're not trying to add all of this dubbing at once. You're trying to pull small amounts of dubbing from that to add to make a relatively small diameter, let's call it, a very thin dubbing noodle. And I'm going to slide that up to the hook and more or less cover the thread. If it's not perfectly covered, I'm not too worried about it. I'm still going to run 2 ribs through this. So if it's not perfectly level or any of that, I can use the 2 ribbings to kind of mash some of that down. So I've got the dubbing all the way to the bead. Now I'm going to take the sulky tinsel and I'm going to counter wrap. And I have a little bit of a bump of dubbing you can see right there at the back. And I'm going to try and capture just like that with this tinsel. And I'm going to counter wrap the tinsel, so wrapping the opposite direction I did with my thread. So that counter wraps the dubbing all the way to the bead. Smooths out my body just a little bit. Tie it off, get rid of the excess. Then I'm going to take the 7X tippet and wrap it the same direction as the thread. And once again, if there are any bumps or anything that you want to smooth out, you can space this out so that you capture any of that loose dubbing with the ribbing. But as the fish eat this, the dubbing is going to get more and more teased out, so I wouldn't worry too much about a perfect body. If it looks pretty good to you, the fish are going to agree. All right, now we've got the blue body in place. Next up, I'm going to use a hen hackle. You could use brown, you could use furnace, you could use greenwell, any of those. I'm going to grab the tips of this and then stroke the fibers back to make the top just like that. Then I'm going to trim a little notch so that I can capture that with the thread. I'm going to grab that little notch right behind the bead, throw a couple of wraps in with tension, and then I'm just going to do 1 turn with this hackle. Once all the way around, capture it again with the thread. You can tie your soft hackles from the butt of the feather. If you'd rather do it the other direction, that's fine. This is the way I tend to do it because I like to hold on to the butt end of the feather. So this stuff down here that's not usable, that's what I like to hold on to. And I can get several more flies out of this same feather that way without having to waste the good parts of it. Then I just stroke the fibers back with my fingers, run over them with the thread a couple of times, just stroke them backward. Notice the sparseness of the hackle. You don't want 2 or 3 wraps of hackle here. You want it nice and sparse. And then the last step is to add our hot spot, ice dub and UV pink. Magic dubbing right there. Fish like this color. So again, just a tiny bit of dubbing, not very much. Less is more, just like always. Dubbing. Make that as tight as possible. I'm going to just cover the thread right behind the bead with that pink dubbing. And then we're going to whip finish and try and create a little bit of a band of red right behind the bead. Sometimes I'll whip finish these 2 or 3 times to make that band and also give it several knots so that should one of the thread wraps come undone, I've got some backups. Okay, once we've got that, we can trim that out of the way. I've got one rogue piece of dubbing there that's going to bother me, so I'm going to trim it away. Just a couple more up here on my bead. To the naked eye, I can't even see those. I can only see them in the macro, so they're going to drive me crazy there. But that's it, the finished blue dart. You can see it's very similar to the red dart, except that it's got the blue tail and blue body. The hackle and the thorax dubbing, the red thread, the gold bead are all the same. Give that one a whirl. I think you'll like the old blue dart. All right, we're back live now. So that was the blue dart. The blue dart is actually not a brand new fly. It's just a lesser known fly. It came out the same time as the red dart. Again, please send in any questions you have. Some of the questions coming in so far asking about bead sizes. And you can tie these, if you're tying them yourself, the glory in tying your own flies is you can tie them with any bead size you like. So whether you're fishing them with a dry and a dropper, or you're Euro nymphing them, or even below an indicator, you can adjust the weight of the fly based on that bead size. So that was a 14 hook, which is the most common size I use for that particular fly. I most of the time tie those with, say, a 3 to maybe 3.5 mil bead, but you could tie them with anything from about a 2.5 through a 4 mil bead on size 14 hook to accommodate really light or really heavy applications. So in really fast water where you need it to get down deep, go with the heavy bead. And if you're at the shallow water or slow water where you don't need a lot of weight there, then lighten up that bead. What other questions do we have coming in? And actually, before we get to more questions, while I'm thinking about it, this whole session, in case you wanted to reference it later, and all of these tying sessions will be archived on YouTube. So you can see each of the 3 flies we're going to tie separately, or you can watch this entire session all on YouTube down the road. So you don't have to memorize all this right now. You can come back and rewatch as many times as you'd like. Let's see, what other questions do we have? Bead choices, we covered that one. Somebody gave us a shout out on the headstand. I appreciate that. The headstand's a really fun fly, good carp fly, even works pretty well for panfish and small bass sometimes. What else? Somebody asks, I assume this is more of a river fly, but have you ever tried using dart flies on high mountain lakes? Maybe as a point fly on multiple droppers? I have, yes. Darts are very good on high mountain lakes. Really, anywhere you would fish in a tractor pattern, these are great flies. I fish red darts in particular. The blue one I haven't fished as much in lakes as I have in rivers, but it would be a good pattern, especially if there are rainbows or brookies or cutthroats around. They seem to really like that blue color. Other questions might you have about that fly? Hopefully I described it pretty well in the little tutorial. Again, that was a 14. You could tie these in 16s and 12s, 18s, 10s, as big or small as you like. Have fun with them as you see fit. What else? What else? Fluorescent pink. The chat is hard for me to read. The messages are going right over the top of each other, so it's hard to say what you're asking exactly. But it looks like somebody's asking about regular UV pink or the fluorescent hot pink, and maybe can you substitute them, or do I prefer one? I can't tell what it's asking there, but I definitely prefer the UV pink. The fluorescent hot pink is brighter for sure, and if it's working for you, I would suggest that you keep using it. For me, I really like the UV pink. It's a little bit more pale, and for some reason for me it works better. The fish seem to like that color better. What other questions might you have? The blue dart. Next up, we're going to do another dart pattern, the purple darts. But if we have a few more questions, we will cover those first. Let's see. I see the beginning of a question. It says, how do you pick? Oh, there we go. Blue versus red versus purple. That is a good question. So for me personally, I tend to start with red. That's my go-to. Purple is the newest one, so I've been fishing it more recently. But the blue has its days. I don't know why they like blue. I don't know why they like any of the darts, to be honest, but the fish just eat them. The blue dart for me, though, is either all on or all off, where the red dart's pretty consistent. If I throw the blue dart on, it sometimes just really knocks the fish, and other times does not. I was fishing with a buddy of mine on Utah's Provo River here a while back, and we were fishing opposite sides of the river, just working upstream, and he was catching fish quite a bit faster than I was. And I asked him about 10 fish in. I said, "Hey, what did you switch to? Because you just changed flies that seem to make a big difference." And he said, "I'm fishing a red dart." And I said, "Well, that's what I have on too, so no big deal." Well, a few more fish later, he's still outpacing me, and I'm going, "What is going on?" So I waded over to have a look at it, and sure enough, he wasn't fishing a red dart, he was fishing a blue dart. So I switched to the blue dart, and suddenly I started catching fish at the pace that he was experiencing instead of the slower pace. They're really effective. All these dart flies are really effective on a Euro rig. They're also some of my favorites for a dry dropper rig. So try them either way. Not that they wouldn't work on an indicator, but a lot of times with an indicator, you'd want to fish them in water types that wouldn't require extra weight because they're weighted in tungsten, where with a lead wire body and a tungsten head, where a lot of times with an indicator rig, it's better to fish an unweighted fly. Cool. Let's see. Any other questions in here? I think we've got all the questions covered on that one. So with that in mind, let's go to the purple dart. And if you have more questions after the purple dart on the blue, we can try and cover those then also. But let's go to the purple dart. So this is much like the red dart and the blue dart, except you'd guess it, it's purple. Purple is, as you know, a hot color in fly tying right now. Purple dry flies, purple nymphs, purple streamers, purple everything. Purple, purple, purple. So I figure if we can catch fish on purple grasshoppers, we have to be able to do it on nymphs. They like this fly. This is a cool little attractor pattern. I've got a 14 jig hook in the vise. This is a 3.5 millimeter slotted tungsten bead in gold. I'm going to use red UTC 70 thread. And we're going to start right behind the bead, work our way back to the bend of the hook, and I'm going to use some purple saddle hackle for the tail. Pull off maybe somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch of fibers. Make an effort to try and keep the tips as even as possible. And I'm going to tie them in right at the bend, capture them with the thread. Wrap it all the way up to the bead, just like the blue dart. You can add lead wire to this if you want to make it a little bit heavier. I'm getting more and more to where I just change the bead sizes because it's easier to tell how much weight is on them by just looking at the bead. So I know if I have a bigger bead, it's a heavier fly, and if I have a smaller bead, it's a lighter fly. Next up, I'm going to tie in the ribbing. I've got sulky tinsel in the opal color and just some 7X tippet that I've got in my hand here now. Got them together. Let's see if I can pull these down to where they're even. There we go. Now the tips are relatively even. I'm going to capture them with the thread and then tie them all the way down the shank. I'm tying both of those in together. You can see those separate a little bit. Tie them all the way down to the tail. Then I'm going to add my body. The body is ice dub and UV purple. So just like always, dubbing, dubbing, dubbing. Less is more. We say that all the time, but everybody comes in the shop and emails us saying, how do you get dubbing to be so sparse? You do it by taking a bunch like this and pulling about that much out of it and twisting that onto the thread at one time. If you're trying to twist too much dubbing on the thread, it's going to give you fits, especially a more coarse dubbing like ice dub. So little amounts, long dubbing noodle, like so. Then I'm going to take my fingers and just slide it right down to the hook like that. And then I'm going to try and start covering my red thread. I'm going to make a body all the way up to the bead. Perfect, just like that. Next up, I'm going to take the sulky tinsel and I'm going to counter wrap the body with the opposite direction I wrap the thread. So counter wrapping that dubbing, again trapping some of those high spots in the dubbing to try and smooth it out, tying it off, get rid of the excess. Then I'm going to take the 7X tippet and I'm going to wrap it the opposite direction. First I got to get it out of my tail though. There we go. So I'm going to wrap it the opposite direction I wrap the sulky, which is the same direction as the thread. This is adding some durability to the fly. Holds the dubbing in place, holds the tinsel in place, all the way to the bead. and then get rid of it. 7x tippet. Next up is the soft hackle. I'm going to use this is a furnace hen hackle. Again, you could use Greenwell or Brown or probably even Coachman Brown, but fiery brown would work fine. This is a furnace. I've trimmed a little tab in the tip of this that I can capture with the thread to hold it in place. Then I'm just going to stroke those fibers back and just make one wrap of hackle. One time around, capture it with the thread. You don't want this hackle to be too dense. Very sparse soft hackle is better. Then I'm going to pull all the fibers back with my fingers and try and coax them backward, hold them in place with the thread a little bit. Now they're all facing back like a soft hackle should. And the last step is to add the thorax, UV dub and ice dub and UV pink. Once again, tiny amounts of pink dubbing. It doesn't take very much to make a little hot spot. Just enough to cover the area where I've tied back that hackle. Clean up my head a little bit. Oops. Like so. And then I'm going to try and throw a few wraps in there to make a little red bar right behind the bead. I oftentimes whip finish them 2 or 3 times using this trusty Tiemco midge whip finisher. Pull nice and tight on the thread. Trim that away. Add some head cement and you're all done. You have a fresh purple dart. This is a really great attractor pattern. Fish as well as a dropper below dry like a chubby Chernobyl, or also works great on a nymph rig, whether you're indicator nymphing or doing the old Euro nymphing. Have at it. All right, we're back live. Thanks for watching that. That was the purple dart that time around. That's the newer of the dart series. So we had a few questions that have come in while that was playing. First off, one of the questions is, how has the purple or blue darts done for me in competitions? And I haven't actually fished a purple dart in competition. It's pretty new. I've only been fishing it myself, and since we had no competitions this year due to COVID, excuse me, I haven't had a chance to fish it in a comp. The blue dart, however, has worked well for me in some places. In fact, that pattern was basically born in North Carolina, and I think it was 2013, I want to say, at the national championships. I won my first national championships there, and the blue dart was a really big player on those particular waters. So they've done, or that one has done really well for me. The purple dart has yet to be competition proven, but it's been working for me on local waters. Another question that came in was, in a 2-fly rig, where would you put one of these flies? Where would you put a dart? And that is a tough question to answer with, a concrete answer anyway. Most of the time, I'm usually fishing darts in the heavier of the 2 flies. And for me, I tend to fish mostly when I'm nymphing. I tend to fish a Euro system, and I tend to put my heavy fly as my top dropper. So I would tend to have it up high and have my lighter fly behind it. So I tend to fish these in, again, about size 14 with medium to heavier weight beads, and so they tend to be my heavier fly. Now, lots of people that fish a Euro rig put their heavy fly on the point more often. When you put it down low, then you might have your other fly up higher. So you could do that to suit your needs and your own preferences. But for me, I usually fish it as my top fly in a 2-fly rig. Getting some questions on jig hooks and how they work in the water. So jig hooks are great. They're, as you're seeing, probably they're gaining in popularity. More and more nymphs are available on them each year. I started learning about jig nymphs through competition fishing, and as I was practicing with them, I quickly realized that they were really good at staying off the bottom and snagging less, and also really good at having a barbless hook that would hold fish really well. So jig hooks ride with the hook instead of down, inverts so the hook is up. And when the hook is up, it contacts the bottom with the shank of the hook rather than the hook point. So it doesn't roll the hook points as often, and it doesn't get snagged as often. It also, I would argue, it also tends to hook fish in the roof of the mouth where they have more meat. The bottom jaw of a trout is lots of bone and a very thin layer of skin. So when you hook a fish there, especially with a small hook, you're not grabbing much meat. You're just grabbing that little tiny piece of skin, and it's easier to tear a hook out of the bottom jaw. So you can hook and land more fish if you hook them maybe in the corner to the roof of the mouth or on the outside of the mouth on their upper lip. So that's another advantage to the jig style hook. The other advantages to jig hooks, in my opinion, is that they take a broader range of bead sizes. So if you're using, again, if you're tying these darts and 14s, you could go from 2.3, 2.5, 2.8, 3, 3.3, 3.5, 3.8, 4 mil beads, all on those same hooks, on that same size 14 hook. So they hold a broad range of beads, which allows you to accommodate a broad range of weights to get deeper or stay shallower, as the case may be. What other questions do we have in here? I'm learning that Charlie Craven is talking trash. That's nothing new. Charlie likes to do that. But that's okay. I like to talk trash back to him. I won't say what Russ Miller said about you, though, Charlie. That wouldn't be nice to share publicly. Just kidding. He didn't say anything bad. Let's see here. Favorite bead color. Somebody said they heard that fish don't eat gold beads. Well, that's again subject to debate, and I would give to your preference. For me, my favorite bead color is definitely gold, followed by silver. If I had to pick a third choice, it would probably be a light metallic pink. But I tend to fish a lot of gold and silver beads. But lots of other people I know love other colors of beads, and I'm sure if you tied the darts with copper, they would probably work just fine for you. I can't catch a dang fish on copper, but lots of other people do. So maybe you can get better success out of other colored beads than I do. Good question. What other questions might you have about either of those two darts? Anything else before we move on to another fly? How do I choose bead color? That's a good question. I choose bead colors based on, one, my preference, which usually is gold or silver. I choose them based on, am I looking to be more of an attractor pattern or more imitative? I think silver is a little bit more imitative because a lot of insects will have air bubbles that look silvery around them as they're emerging. Midges, for instance, or some of the mayflies, some of the caddis will get little air bubbles as they're rising towards the surface. And so I like silver for that, where if I'm throwing an attractor, like those darts, for instance, I would probably choose gold. I also feel like some bead colors just play in. They just I don't know what the right word is. They collaborate better with the other colors of the fly. So on a hare's ear, for instance, I think a hare's ear looks best with a gold bead. On a midge, maybe a black bead or a silver bead would look a little more natural. But again, beads can just come down to your personal preference. What else? What else? Do I ever fish two darts at a time of different colors? Yeah, I do. I would probably more often than that fish two darts at a time of the same color. There are times where you find a fly, I'm sure all of you have experienced this, the fish are absolutely annihilating. And when that's the case, it's often not in your best interest to fish a second fly that's any different. So then I'll just fish two of the exact same pattern. Maybe one size smaller, one size bigger, something like that. But when they're really just crushing one fly, having two of them on can't hurt a bit. So I will definitely fish two of the same or two darts together. If I were fishing two of them together, that's another case for having them tied in different bead sizes, because I would like to have, let's just say I'm going to tie on two blue darts. I would like to have one that's maybe 14 and a 3 or 3.5 mil bead on a lot of my local rivers anyway, and maybe a smaller one, maybe a 16 with a 2.5 or 3 mil bead to get it a little bit lighter. What else? Any other questions before we move to the next fly? Not too much. Well, I think if that's the case, then we will move on to the third fly, which is called the silver bullet baitis. So this is a little bit more imitative than the dart series. It's not an exact imitation, as none of my flies really are. They're more general representations or something that has kind of basic color, maybe some basic silhouette features, and oftentimes a hot spot. The silver bullet baitis does not have a really bright hot spot, as you'll see, but it is a little bit more imitative than, say, the last two darts that we just watched. So let's cut to the silver bullet baitis, and then we'll field some questions about it. All right, let's start tying this silver bullet baitis. So I've got a 16 jig hook in the vise. This is a 3mm bead. You could silver tungsten bead that's slotted. You could use any size of bead you like to accommodate the weight that you would like. So if you're fishing this fly as a dropper below dry, you might drop this down to a 2.5. If you're fishing it as an anchor fly, you might go up to a 3.5. 3 is the most common, or a 2.8 or a 3mm bead are the most common sizes I use on this particular fly. So I've got that silver bead on the hook. Then we're going to use some light olive thread. This is UTC 70 denier light olive. Get that thread started. And then I'm going to add some Coque de Leon for a tail. This is nice speckled stuff. The real deal, straight from Spain. Grab a few fibers of it for the tail. Capture it with the thread. Tie it all the way forward so I don't have a bump at the back end. I'm going to get rid of the excess. And then we're going to tie in some wire. This is sculpin olive wire in brassy size from UTC. And I'm going to slide the wire right in the back of the slot to kind of hold it in place, and then I like to tie the wire straight down the back of the hook. And you want to end with your thread wrapping over it just barely shy of your tail. And I'm using this nice thread that widens out that will cover to basically cover up the wire tie-in. And you don't want to go all the way to the tail, because if you do, your first wrap will make this tail material get pushed around to the side. So because I'm short of it just a bit, I can make a full turn around and not destroy the nice even tail. Then I'm just going to space the ribbing through the fly up to the bead, capture it with the thread, tie it off, do the old helicopter wire trick. A couple more to hold it in place. Okay, next up we're going to use some resin, just some UV resin. Doesn't take much of this. In fact, this is under pressure apparently, so it's got more than I need. The nice thing about this is you can kind of move it around your fly. I may get just a touch more on there. But if you get too much, it blots off pretty well. I've still got a little more than I want. I just want enough on there to kind of seal the thread. And then I'm going to hit it with the light. Uh-oh, I've got one pesky little guy right about there. I trimmed him down a little but didn't get rid of it altogether. That's going to drive some of us nuts. But that's okay, the fish won't care. So I'm going to set it with the UV light. And then the last step is to get a little bit of peacock black ice dubbing. And this doesn't take very much. This is another one of those less is more. I've just got a tiny pinch on the macro. It always looks like a lot. That would be a lot. I just took about this much. There's not very much on there to make a really, really sparse thorax with this peacock black ice dubbing. Right behind the bead. I even wrapped through it with the thread a couple times just to give it a little more durability. And then just give it a whip finish. And if you're a little worried about some of these longer dubbing fibers like I sometimes am, you can come in and just give them a haircut. That is it. A really, really simple, sparse, dense fly. Sinks really fast, really, really durable, really quick and easy to tie. Silver bullet baitis. All right, we're back. So that was the silver bullet baitis. So both the silver bullet baitis and the purple dart are new for 2021 from Umpqua. So if you want to order them, we'll have them here in the store at Fly Fish Food. We'll also have them on our website, and most quality fly shops around the country will carry Umpqua flies. So you could likely get them through your local dealer too if you want to support a local small fly shop. They always appreciate that. Otherwise, we had a couple more questions. Let's see. How do I choose what fly to start with on a new river? That's always a good question. Well, you base it on lots of things. Number one, I want to learn some things about the river. If I've never been there before, I'm trying to get on the interwebs and do a little research. So I want to find out, is it a tailwater fishery? Is it a freestone fishery? How big of a river is it? You know, I might look at cubic feet per second measurements, gauges, and learn a bit about how heavy of flies I might need, or learn about the type of aquatic insects I might find in that river. There's a lot of information that's available for free online. So do a little bit of research. And if I had done that, let's say I'm heading to a freestone river, I would tend to start with something that's an attractor, like a dart type pattern, maybe a dart teamed with a Frenchie or a silver bullet baitis. Just about every trout stream in the world has some sort of baitis nymph in it. So that's a safe bet as well. But if I was going to start on a tailwater fishery, tailwater being a river that's coming out of a dam, so tailwaters tend to have more consistent flows. They tend to have colder, consistent flows, and different types of insects tend to be more prolific in tailwaters. For instance, again, baitis and small mayflies, midges, for instance, small crustaceans like scuds and sometimes sow bugs do really well in those tailwater type environments. The tailwater creates a river that's almost more like a spring creek because it has more controlled flow, water temperature, etc. So the tailwater fisheries tend, not always, but tend to grow more small insects. So if I knew I was going to go to a tailwater, I might start with, again, an attractor just to see what happens if I throw on a dart. If that doesn't work, then I would team that with something that's more imitative, a tiny little midge pattern, a tiny little baitis nymph, confidence fly, something like the silver bullet baitis, like an iron lotus, like a thread Frenchie, like a standard Frenchie. Any of those would be confidence flies for me, and would be flies that I would start throwing on a tailwater. Other good options would be stuff like a tailwater sow bug, again, a tiny scud pattern, something like that. And then don't forget worms. Annelid imitations are really, really good to just search for fish as well when you're on a new river. So that's always a good question. What else have we got coming in here? Any tips on rigging? Rigging is a very broad, thing we could talk about. But rigging with nymphs, I like to usually fish nymphs on tag ends rather than tying them in line. That's not to say that you can't catch fish if you're tying them in line. But if you have a hook and you've tied tippet to this side of it, and then you tie to the bend of the hook for your second piece of tippet going the other direction for your second fly, you've created an area where the fish has to come from a perfect angle to really get the fly in. If they come from the front or they come from the back, then they're going to run into the tippet and oftentimes push the fly away before they ever get a chance to get at it. I think even more important than that is that you have tippet tied into the front and the back, which allows this fly to drift as though it's tied to a frozen rope, if you will. It's just got no ability, because it has tippet on both sides, to be at the mercy of the current. So if you can just have one tie-in point for every nymph, it's going to get a better drift. It's going to look more natural to the fish, in addition to allowing the fish to get at it a little easier. So I tend to try to tie a triple surgeon's knot and have a tag in hanging down, tie a fly onto it, and on the other arm of the tippet, I would tie my second fly back down a little ways, maybe 20 to 24 inches behind the first fly. But I think tying on tags is a really important part of rigging. I actually like to do that with streamers. I like to do that with nymphs. I even do it with dry flies in some cases when we're fishing more than one dry fly. On lakes, I spent a lot of time on lakes this year fishing 3 dry flies at a time, and having the top 2 on tags really increased my hookups. If you have more specific rigging questions, please send them over. What are my feelings on realistic flies versus impressionistic flies? Where do you start and when do you change? That's a good question. I think there's a place for both of them. There are times where trout are really selectively feeding. That said, I would argue that most of the time trout are very opportunistic. And we say a lot in our demonstrations and in articles and things that we write, blog posts, that presentation trumps fly pattern. That's, by that I mean you could send somebody that has no idea what they're doing with all the right flies to your favorite river, and if they have no idea which water type to fish, how to fish get a drag-free drift, or which depth to get your nymphs if you're nymphing, they're not going to catch anything. If you send somebody with all the wrong flies, let's call them, but they get drifts, they fish the right water types, and they're getting to the right depth, again, assuming we're fishing nymphs, that angler is going to catch fish. So the presentation is always more important than the fly pattern. But to catch the most fish, you want to combine those two elements. You want to have a great presentation and have a really good fly pattern. Now, logically to us anglers, it makes sense for us that we just want to imitate exactly what the fish are eating. And that does make logical sense to us. Unfortunately, trout don't reason, so they're very opportunistic. So what makes sense to us sometimes doesn't make sense to the fish. And not that they're thinking about it, but they show it by taking things. That's where patterns like a red dart come into play, or a purple dart, or a blue dart. They don't imitate anything in the river. They just pique the interest of the fish, and the fish eat them. Why? We'll never know. But they do eat them. I tend to fish more impressionistic instead of realistic flies, I guess, more attractor type flies than I do exact imitations. We're getting a question about indicator fishing versus Euro. I'm not sure exactly what the question is there, but they both have their time and place. For me, I spent most of my learning years in nymphing, let's say my first almost 15 years of fly fishing, fishing indicator rigs, and they're very effective. Then I learned to Euro nymph, and it's also very effective. There are times and places where both rigs are the best option. For me, in most of my home waters, where I do the majority of my river fishing is on foot wade fishing, I find that Euro nymphing for me is more productive by quite a bit than indicator nymphing. That said, there are times and places, again, where the indicator shines. For instance, fishing from a drifting boat, you can suspend nymphs at distance a long way away from the boat, in front of the boat, and you can't do that, at least not very far away with a Euro rig. In super windy conditions, an indicator has a distinct advantage. It's tough to fish a Euro system in really, really heavy wind. If it's just light breeze, no big deal. But both of them can be really effective. Both are important tools to learn. I think you really ought to learn both techniques. All right, my friend Pablo says hello from Spain. Hello, Pablo. Hope you're well, my friend. Let's see. Can I talk about hot spots? Sure. So hot spots are usually referring to brightly colored thread or brightly colored dubbing or a tag, something that's on the fly that's a really bright color. Fluorescent orange, fluorescent pink, fluorescent chartreuse, bright red, blue or purple could be a hot spot. Something that's a contrasting color to the main color of the fly. So if you took something like any of the dart series with the red dart in particular has that red tag with a darker body, that's a great hot spot. Or on a Frenchie, you have the pink UV shrimp pink or the UV pink on a thread Frenchie, collar right behind the bead. That could be a hot spot. You could also have just something as simple as red thread behind a bead, like on a Rainbow Warrior or on an Iron Lotus. Hot spots, again, there's no hot spots on real insects, but they pique the interest of the fish. And in many cases, using a fly with a hot spot is more productive than just using a drab imitation that looks exactly like the food that the fish are eating. I know that goes against the grain, but trust me, in competitions, if people could catch more fish using an exact imitation, they would. And more often than not, people are using very, very general type of patterns rather than exact imitations. Let's see. What color is the wire on the silver bullet baitis, and why did I pick it? That's a good question. It is the same as on the thread Frenchie, which is UTC ultra wire in brassy size, and it's called Sculpin Olive is the color. I picked it because it's one of my favorite wire colors, and I've done pretty well on it. It has a slightly different thread base, the silver bullet baitis does, than the thread Frenchie. The thread Frenchie uses a standard olive thread, and the silver bullet baitis uses a light olive thread. They don't look very different once there's resin on them, but they do lighten and darken just a tiny bit. What else? How do you tell if you're at the right depth for Euro nymphing? That's a good question too. It's tough to tell that exactly. There's a fine line there. If you're never contacting bottom, then you're probably not deep enough. If you're constantly dragging bottom, you're too deep. You don't want your flies, when you're Euro nymphing, you're not using any other weight. You're just using weighted flies. So you don't want your flies contacting the bottom of the river constantly. They're going to snag a ton if they do, and the fish don't often eat right on the bottom. They will, but most of the time they're eating insects in the drift. So you want your flies just off the bottom. I think the easiest ways to tell that you are down in the right zone is to watch your sider. Learning to read the sider is probably the number one hurdle in Euro nymphing. You can watch your cider in relation to the current speed at the surface. And if the current at the surface is zipping by your cider, then you know your flies are in that low layer of water near the river bottom that's moving slower than the surface water. And that will tell you that you're getting deep. Add to that your flies contacting bottom occasionally through the drift. Again, not dragging bottom everywhere, but just contacting it here and there, and you'll know you're down in the strike zone. What else? Did the silver bullet inspire the thread Frenchie or vice versa? That's a good question. They were both actually out at about the same time. I've fished both of them interchangeably for years. The thread Frenchie was put into production sooner, but they're very similar patterns. Really, the biggest difference being the darker thorax versus the bright pink thorax. I don't know that I could say that one inspired the other, but they're both very, very effective, and I encourage you to try both. At times, one will outshine the other. How would you fish the silver bullet baitis differently than the darts? I would oftentimes use them in tandem. I would use the dart as my attractor and heavier fly, and I would use the baitis as my smaller, lighter fly, usually behind it. But if it's really shallow water, or the fish are just not having it, when they, not having an attractor type pattern, by not having it, I mean they're not eating it, then you might end up fishing two really imitative flies. But most of the time, I would fish both of them together. All good questions. Thank you. What else? Any other good questions out there? Anything on really any sort of fly fishing questions that I can try and answer? I won't know all the answers, but I will try my best. Maybe while we're waiting for that to happen, again, I want to remind you that all of these videos, mine is the first one, just starting the season of fly tying videos through Umpqua. So we have Greg Garcia on tap for next week, next Tuesday at 6 p.m. So you can catch his. Also, these will all be archived on YouTube, so that'll be great if you want to just re-watch, or if you missed part of it, you had to tune out. You'll be able to see them again in the future. What other questions do we have? We're getting a couple more coming in. How did I get into competition fishing? I got into competition casting first, and then I entered a few ESPN and Versus or Outdoor Channel competitions that included casting and fishing. And then in one of those, the Fly Fishing Masters, no, sorry, it wasn't the Fly Fishing Masters, it was the ESPN Great Outdoor Games one year. I competed against some of the current Team USA members, being current at that time. And the team was going through a transition, Team USA that is, was going through a transition of taking what I call the Good Old Boys Network, and they were transitioning into regionals and nationals and a point system to try and have anglers that had put some time in through, had to go through a qualification process and earn points and earn their way onto the team via points. So I got involved right when that was starting to take place, and have been fortunate enough to stay on the team ever since. That was in late 2003. Right now, there are no competitions to go to, but if you wanted to get involved in competitions, if we clear up this COVID stuff, then just do some Google research and you'll find the Team USA website, and you can learn how to attend some of the regional events and then maybe qualify for nationals and then make the team. What else? We have just a little bit more time left, but still hit me up with a few more questions if you've got a few. Let's see. Can I share my #1 tip for learning Euro nymphing? Somebody says they're struggling to learn it. Well, #1 tip, that is a tough one. I would say my #1 tip for learning Euro nymphing is to learn to cast the rig. That's what I see most people struggle with at the beginning. When you're used to throwing a fly line that's weighted and an indicator and split shot and a couple of nymphs, the rod loads a lot easier than a Euro system. When we're using a Euro system with a super thin fly line and a very thin leader and nothing but weighted flies out there, no indicators, no split shot, it doesn't load as easily. So learning to cast. So my #1 tip would be taking flies under the rod going back on the back cast, and then over the rod going forward on the forward cast. Most folks really, really struggle with accuracy and control with that long rod, long leader system, right out of the gates anyway. Most people after a few sessions get it figured out, but really practice that casting. Otherwise, maybe learn to read the cider. I find when I'm guiding folks that I can watch them on their shoulder, watch them fishing. They're in contact with the flies, and I can watch the cider hesitate and process that in my mind and verbalize that they need to set the hook before they ever register that something needs to take place. So that tells me that they're not reading the sighter the same way I am. So watch for that sighter as it's drifting along. Watch for it to stop, to pull down, to hesitate, to lift up, to change angles. If it does anything that you didn't do, anything that you didn't do with the rod to influence the sighter, if it does any of those little hesitations, you ought to be setting the hook to check for a fish. Reading the sighter is a real skill. What else have we got? Most productive colors for scuds. Well, for me, most productive colors would be gray, olive, or a combination of the two, gray, olive. Sometimes in tailwater situations, you can get scuds that will get up into the shallows and the water drops and they die. Then they usually turn pink or orange colors. So sometimes a pink or orange scud could be really effective too. But most commonly, gray to gray olive, I would argue, are the best scud colors. Any other questions before we sign off here? I appreciate everybody tuning in. I appreciate all the great questions. Like one more time, this will be archived on YouTube, so you can check it out there. I thank you again for participating. Thank you for supporting my flies, and I want to give a shout out to Umpqua for giving me the opportunity to present this to all of you anglers out there. I hope that you're having a great time fly fishing, whether you're learning it like I am or whether you're a trained professional, more like Charlie Craven. I kid. Charlie doesn't know anything about fly fishing. No, but seriously, Charlie and I like to razz each other a little bit. Charlie will be on deck here in a few weeks, I'm sure, and then I can get to harassing him live. But get out there, chase a fish, have a little fun, and we appreciate the support here at Fly Fish Food, and I know that Umpqua appreciates the support when you're purchasing their flies and tying materials and leaders and tippet and all of the accessories that Umpqua puts out there. I'm a particular fan of their packs and bags. If you haven't checked out Umpqua's packs and bags, do it. They're awesome. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I wish you all well and happy angling.